and welcome to another special episode of the Family Based Podcast. My name is Jake, and this is Fitz. Do you mind if I call you Fitz, or is it Michael?
Yeah, no, of course. That's what most of my friends call me, and yeah. I think it's abnormal nowadays, like when I hear a friend or a buddy call me anything other than that. It's usually my family either calls me Michael or Fitz, so...
Well, yeah, I mean, in their professional setting, I feel like Michael has to be. But either way, so as we talked about before the podcast started, we never really got a chance to talk like one-on-one growing up, but you were a friend of the family, so we obviously knew each other that way, and we're both Cubs fans, so it just kind of became obvious that this could be an easy conversation. So thank you for doing it.
Thanks for having me.
And if you don't mind, would you like to intro yourself a little bit? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so my name's Michael Fitzpatrick, or Fitz. Grew up in Homewood. How our paths crossed, as you mentioned. Your cousins, Ben and Dan, were close friends with a buddy of mine growing up, Dave McNeil. And so I connected with Ben and Dan a little bit later in life. I want to say around late high school and to college. And so, we had all those summer games playing baseball together. And that's how, we came to know one another. Grew up in Homewood my entire life. Went to the University of Illinois, Springfield. There is a Springfield campus. Most people don't know that. It's teeny tiny. There was a class of 110 freshmen. So going to HF, where I think I had like 600 or 700 kids we graduated with, it was a bit of a culture shock, but it was a great experience going away to school, growing on your own, learning to live by yourself. Since then, I work in human resources. I work at the University of Chicago. Have a wife of 5 years and big Cubs fans. Interestingly enough, she was a dancer throughout her entire life. So when we first met each other, she was not big into sports. I've since converted her. She loves football now. She actually reminds me every year now. She's like, you have to turn on the Red Zone package for football. So it's interesting, how life changes in that way. In terms of, about me, I have a 4-year-old golden retriever named Griffey, after Ken Griffey Jr., who, of course, was my favorite baseball fan or player. We had a 10-year-old golden we put down a couple weeks ago. His name was Rudy, and I share this because it's a pretty funny story. So living in New Lenox now, I did not know this, but the Rudiger family, if you're a Notre Dame fan, they went to Providence Catholic, and they actually lived down the block. So when I named Rudy, I wanted to pick the dog's name after something that was playful, and I wouldn't look like a fool if I was yelling it down the street looking for the dog. And so Rudy came to mind. And so a couple of years back, I was, taking the dog for a walk. And one of my neighbors said, "Oh, you must be a huge Notre Dame fan. Like, have you told the Rudiger family?" And I was like, "What are you talking about? Like, I'm not a Notre Dame fan." And they were like, "Yeah, the Rudiger family actually lives, that's their house right on the corner." So interestingly enough, they live on our block. So I tell that story to people like it's just a coincidence, but they're a nice family, and it's good to see that, they're living in the area. Outside of that, as I'm getting a little bit older, I still like to play sports as much as possible. We did a lot more recreational leagues when I was a little bit younger, starting to catch up with me a little bit, but trying to stay as active as much as possible. And yeah, that's a quick overview of me.
Yeah, I mean, again, more than I knew, so that's great.
Yeah,
it's good to know. So not a big Notre Dame fan, as you said, but you're a big, obviously, Cubs fan.
Yes.
How did you become a Cubs fan? If you think back, like what was the thing, or was there a person? How did you become a Cubs fan?
Yeah, I think some of it gets ingrained in you. Like for me, that's at least how it happened. My family, particularly on my mom's side, was always a big baseball house. My grandfather loved the Cubs. He'd watch the Cubs every single day. he was watching me when I was at an early age. And I remember vaguely, you know, when you're that young, you remember bits and pieces. So I remember going to a game with him. But when he'd watch me, he'd always have Cubs on the TV. I mean, it was on WGN. It was the easiest baseball team to watch. It was national.
Right.
And he was a huge Cubs fan. My aunt had a very close relationship with him as well. So she was a big Cubs fan. And, you know, I was her godson. And so, you know, we've had that bond ever since. My grandfather passed away at a early age for me. I was about 4 or 5. But I think that that's part of what instilled, you know, me being a Cubs fan is, you know, watching the games with him at an early age. My mom's side so ingrained in the Cubs. And then at the time growing up, it was around when Ryan Sandberg and Mark Grace were big. And I remember, you know, as many people in, I think, the 80s and early 90s, Ryan Sandberg was the guy. And so he was always my favorite Cub. And my aunt would always refer to him as the golden boy because, you know, he could do no wrong in the Cubs' eyes. And I think they still hold him in that regard. But that's pretty much how I became a Cubs fan. And it's interesting because, you know, growing up on the South Side, and I'm sure you're the same way, you know, Southwest suburbs, I should say. Yeah. It's not the norm to be a Cubs fan. I had a lot more friends that were Sox fans. And in the early mid 90s, I mean, the Sox were a fun and great team to watch. So I was never one of those where I was spiteful of the Sox. I think I was a little jealous. You know, they had Frank Thomas and Jack McDowell and all of those guys. And, you know, we had our favorites, you know, Sammy Sosa and all of them, but we were never quite as competitive or to that point where we were competing like they were.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you could say the history of the Cubs has not produced a lot of winning seasons. So, yeah. Kind of fits most Cubs fans. But yeah, I mean, again, growing up on the south side of Chicago, I think people just assume if you don't know anything about baseball, you just assume that there's Cubs fans like surround the city. At least when I went to college, most people just assumed you were a Cubs fan because that's the team they knew. But if you know Chicago South, if you are even, well, I would argue if you even live in the city of Chicago and South, it's all White Sox fans. And I mean, my cousins, as you said, were White Sox fans, so we had like kind of contrarian like rivalry. Um, but was that when you became aware that there was that kind of rivalry, contrarian nature of being a fan of the Cubs? Did you ever consider watching switching over to the White Sox? Was that not really something you consciously thought of?
I can't say I ever consciously thought of it. You know, I had some Sox players that I really liked watching. I mean, I think that anybody in the 90s loved watching Frank Thomas. I mean, he was an amazing player and Hall of Famer. But they just didn't pull at me, and I didn't gravitate towards them like I did with the Cubs. And I think that there was also something that allured me to the Cubs because of their struggles. Like, you wanted to be part of that, to see them finally break that, you know, if you believe in curses, the curse, or become destined to win a championship finally. So yeah, I don't think that there was ever that chance of converting per se. I think that maybe I was not as into watching them as I became older. But the rivalry, it didn't really resonate with me until I would say about the age where you start to get into like Little League and where sports becomes more prevalent, and you hear your friends being like, hey, I'm a Sox fan, and, you know, the Cubs are bad. And at that time, they didn't have interleague play, so it wasn't like there truly was a rivalry unless they saw each other in the World Series.
Yeah, that's true. I don't. So again, I'm just gonna confess. So I don't know. What do you know the year that the White Sox started playing the Cubs in interleague play? Do you remember that?
Not entirely. I want to say interleague was after 98. I don't know why that number sticks out to me. I want to say they started out with like very few interleague games, and then
Yeah.
it became more than that. Maybe even like the early 2000s, because I remember like they started that whole crosstown classic like cup and championship.
Yeah.
But I don't know the exact year, because I
Yeah, I
think that
mean,
also speaks to it. Like, I was never into like a rivalry with them. Like, they're just another team in Chicago. And you are right. Like, when I went to University of Illinois Springfield, when I went down there, like south of I-80, they act as if the only team that exists really is the Cubs. Like, oh, you're a Cubs fan. Whereas like where
right.
we grew up, it was you're a Sox fan, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, it was odd that you would root for, especially root for a team that hadn't won in so long. The people found that a little odd, but I kind of skipped over this this question I wanted to ask. But so was that you mentioned uh, possibly going to a game, seeing the Cubs like on TV? Was seeing the Cubs on TV your earliest memory of the Cubs in general?
Um, I remember like pieces of games with my grandfather, but I would say I probably remember. I remember definitively one game. I was probably 7 or 8 years old, and I went with my aunt, and it was around. I think I was 7 or 8. It was around the time they had this giveaway where all of the Cubs players, hand signed the ball. Like, I don't think you ever see that nowadays. And I
No.
know that because, as a little kid, you're playing with it, you don't quite appreciate it as much. And I smudged the ball. And now, like, older me is like, oh, what were you doing? But it had like Mark Grace on there, Sammy Sosa, Ryan Sandberg. So I would say I had to have been about 7 or 8,
Yeah.
because I was born in '84. So that would have put it at about like 92 if I was 8 years old. So that kind of, I think, aligns with that group. And I remember that one distinctly. I think that sticks out to me the most, like sitting on third base line, deep, not quite where you have the obstructed view, but like beneath the overhang.
Mm, yeah. Yeah. Whenever I do ask people that question, usually it's centered around family members either taking them to a game or watching a game on TV. And like I find that really interesting is that kind of bonding of that relationship and that memories kind of sticks out because on my end, my earliest memory is kind of fuzzy, so it's I wouldn't target it as that. But the earliest memory has to do with like family, going to a game, and having great seats. But for some reason, family always tends to pop up in that, and I mean, that's obviously really important. And you said your aunt is a, was
Yeah.
is a big fan, so that doesn't shock me that there's that connection there. So I think that's cool. Um, I do want to ask you because a Cubs fan. I feel like most people when I ask this question or just assume it's like besides 2016.
Mm-hmm.
e- every year is a bad year, and every year is equally as rough. But to be honest, when I look at being a Cubs fan, there are particular memories that are the hardest. When you look back at being a Cubs fan, for your life, what is the hardest memory, moment, time being a fan? What do you think sticks out?
So it's cliche to say, but that 2003 team, and
Oh,
not because of, like people say the Bartman. I had a totally different view on that, but that was my first year down at University of Illinois Springfield. It was very much so Cardinal Nation, and
yeah.
they were just looking for us to collapse, and so it was hard being in that atmosphere. And like when it was raw and the emotions happened of, they collapsed in that game, and Alou's going nuts in right field, and I'm sorry, left field, and you just felt like it sank. And then I had all these people that I was friends with being like,
Right.
the Cubs stink. And so that was like our moment, like the most success we've ever seen as Cubs fans. And then for it to like go away in a snap. And I think you all knew, or everybody knew, or maybe I'm just like a glass half full kind of person, but I felt that was the telling sign. Like I was not as optimistic going into that next game because it
No.
just felt like everything deflated. And being that
Yeah.
close and having that much momentum going, that was like the most painful. Like even the bad seasons where, they're in last place and, you could even say like with the struggles they're going through now or back in 2012, like I expected that. Like that 2003 year, like they were primed to do that. They shocked us within a lot of ways. It seemed magical and it just broke your heart.
Yeah. No, again, I'm trying, maybe it's not obvious. I'm trying to not interject my stories. So let me just share one just because you brought that up. Is that when I was watching in my living room, and my dad turns to me and says that I will never forget what he says to me. And this is when they're still winning. And later, I think it was like, so when Mark Pryor was still pitching, there was a foul ball, or like a time like almost like 20 30 seconds in between this pitch and then the Bartman play. My dad turns to me during that pause and he says, Jake, don't forget this moment. And then that happens. I'm like, oh, I will never forget this moment. Thank you for saying it. He meant it as positive.
Yeah.
Like, don't forget this. It's going to be crazy. But no, I will never forget that. So I would agree on that. So, but was there, growing up, was your favorite player in those early 2000s or was it in the 90s? Who was that favorite player of yours growing up?
It was all, I think it was because my first memory, like my first favorite player, I could say, was Ryan Sandberg. Like he was one of the best Cubs players at that time. Before we got on the call here today, I was sharing with you like how my aunt said he was the golden boy, and she'd always joke
Yeah.
like she didn't particularly like Sandberg as much because she thought like he was too clean cut. And, the golden boy she'd refer to him as, but yeah, he was my favorite player. As time went on, I would say in the early 2000s, it was tough. Like I didn't have that player that really just I was drawn to, or maybe in the 90s, you just didn't have that many players that you had a connection with. But
Right.
I would say, Kerry Wood, I've always been very fond of. He had a long tenure with the Cubs. I I think I was going that direction as everybody was with Mark Pryor, and then all the injuries happened and the career got derailed. I always, for some reason, especially with that 2003 team, I liked Kenny Lofton. I mean, I liked Kenny Lofton back when he played with the Indians at the time, now the Guardians. I believe he was with the Braves for a while. He was a great addition. And I remember their high fives in the outfield in that year. So maybe not so much of a huge name, but he was one of my favorite. I remember, being into the 98 race with Sammy Sosa and Mark McGwire.
Right.
The home run was fun to watch. I was never a huge Sammy Sosa fan, but, I think he doesn't get enough credit nowadays. Like he got a really bad rap. And I think part of it is he just didn't ever come clean, with his involvement with it. But yeah, those were some of my favorites.
Alleged involvement.
Alleged. Yes.
Gotta say it. I mean, we don't, but let's give him some benefit of the doubt. But as you've mentioned some names, and you think about the Cubs team now, um, maybe there's not a certain player that sticks out. But if you had to choose a player on the team right now that people can turn on the TV or stream it or whatever, Um, who would you say is your favorite player to watch right now on the Cubs?
Yeah, so up until before the sell off of all the players, I would have easily told you Rizzo. I mean, it was clear he was the captain of the team. I loved his story, everything he'd gone through in life, and how he battled back. And I'm still very fond of him because he's not part of the team now. You know, I do like Nico Horner. I think he's still up and coming. He's shown a lot of flashes. I like Wilson Contreras' fire. Hopefully, they're able to keep him.
Maybe.
We'll see about that. And I'd say Kyle Hendricks. But it's hard. Like, I'm in that moment, too, where I don't want to get too fond of them because it's becoming more of a reality that they could be gone. And I think that that's part of the big challenge, too. Like, in the 90s, it was easier to, like, latch on to that favorite player of yours because they tended to stay with teams and have – like more longevity, whereas now players tend to bounce around from team to team. And if you're a diehard fan, like I would classify myself, it's really hard to be like a huge fan of that player when they're not on your team. Aside from Ken Griffey Jr., which I made special.
Right. Yeah.
At least for me.
Yeah. I think it can be hard to attach a player, your favorite, kind of your heart to a player. Not only because they leave in free agency, but then they have scandals and they have their humanness comes out, and it's like an Addison Russell, like a rising starter at shortstop, hitting huge home runs, and then the next year he's not even really on the team.
Yeah.
So there's that. So I, unfortunately and fortunately, we're finding out a lot of stuff. So we can kind of discern who we kind of latch ourselves onto. But yeah, I understand that point. Especially for this current Cubs team, you may want to wait a year or two before you latch on.
Yeah.
But you mentioned Nico Horner, and it's funny you mention him because on the podcast we've been having this conversation. You could say debate, fight. I don't know about Nico Horner, and as you said, he's shown flashes of greatness. I mean, you could say flashes of just being solid or greatness, either one. But going forward, Nico Horner's future seems kind of in the kind of shaky because
Yeah.
in this offseason they may want to sign a big free agent shortstop, and do you move Nico Horner over to second base? What do you really do? Um, in your opinion, you said you like him. Do you keep Nico at short, or do you really just kind of push Nico over and go to the offseason looking for a shortstop?
I think it depends on what the market offers. I mean, if you can get that huge superstar shortstop, yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's shown that he can be at a second base in a viable and actually a very good second baseman. In my opinion, he doesn't have to be at shortstop. And I kind of see him as almost like we used as Javi Baez. We didn't always have Javi Baez at shortstop. Prior to the Addison Russell scandal, he was playing second base, and then we shifted him over. So I think it depends on what we can find in free agency. He's been a good stopgap in shortstop. I don't know if that's his natural position. I guess we'll see. He's still very young and early, but he's been he's been a young, solid player in some instances, and I think that's where I've been more inclined to watch him and like to see the progression he does or doesn't make. Because there's been so much turnover in the past couple of years.
Yeah, sure. If you were the GM, though, so if you were like Jed Hoyer, kind of trying to search free agency or search your farm system, what would you do this offseason? Would you go all in on a free agent, or would you be patient for possibly a year or 2 years and kind of wait to see if Nico Horner does develop? Do you go out and sign him, or do you kind of wait? What would you do?
Yeah, that's a good question. I probably would wait another year. I don't think that they're at, like, we talked about this even before it started, that is this similar to where they were, and I think it was like 2013, where 2013 was really bad, and then 2014 they started to really ramp up and then become the Cubs that we enjoyed for the last 5-6 years. I don't know if it's exactly the same. I see little bits that they're similar, but what I feel is truly missing is, and people argue that Contreras is a leader. I feel like they're really missing that personality on the team. Like, they don't have somebody like a John Lester who, was able to set and build a culture, or a Rizzo. And you have to have those foundational pieces to win a championship. I think that that's really undervalued. Now, that's not to say that, only get somebody with that element. You have to have all the skills. Like, I have a debate with my brother-in-law all the time. Like, he knocks Jason Hayward, and we've seen struggles with all the contract. But there's also something to be said that he was a great clubhouse presence, and that arguably, that speech helped them. Was it worth the however hundreds of millions of dollars we paid? I don't know.
Right.
But you do need to have those personalities, and I don't know if they have that on the team right now.
So, just kind of going off that, is there someone, or are you not sure that there's someone out there that they could sign that could be that presence? Or again, do you just wait for the development? Or like, because see, when I see this off season, especially shortstops, I feel like I want to see a question about like pitchers and whatnot. But if we just stick to shortstops, you can think of Trey Turner, Xander Bogaerts, Carlos Correa, and Dansby Swanson. Now, I've made the push, maybe it's naive, I've made the push to just settle for Dansby Swanson.
Okay.
Defense and offense, he's having his best year. Defensively, he's the only one better defensively by metrics than Nico at shortstop. So I'm not sure if you do that, but he's not the presence, like you say. He's not the veteran presence. I have that question of could Marcus Stroman be that guy? I don't think so.
No, I thought the same thing. Like, everybody was really excited about Marcus, and I think it was taken out of context, I'm sure, in some aspects, but when he talked, I think it was like a month or two after, about already playing someplace else as a possibility. Like, I want to hear somebody that's more confident, like, hey, I'm going to be here for a while. Especially because we did spend a lot on him, and we've seen that the management has a tendency, if there is a good player and he ended up having an amazing year, using him as a chip to bring on some other type of talent. So that's why I was kind of like, I don't know if he's that guy for this next phase of whatever success or struggles they have.
Yeah, again, I feel like on the podcast, I've been the most vocal critic of Tom Burgett's. It feels like every time he says something, I'm just like, we know that's not true. Stop lying to us. Like when he said, we're going to spend money again this off season. Meaning last off season they did, and they're going to again. I'm like, maybe I'm wrong. I don't remember a huge signing, or multiple. But yeah, I'm really interested to see what's the move going forward. Even though Tom Brady has said all the moves going forward are Jets, I don't know if that's placing blame or kind of saying I'm not a part of it. But I'm interested to see what they do moving forward. I wouldn't be shocked if they wait just because they're not going to spend money. To be
Yeah,
honest.
and I think it'll be interesting. I will agree. Like I've been very critical too. I feel like there's been a bit of a sham with it. You know, like I struggle with saying like you're a huge diehard Cubs family, and what I feel like is when we've been close or we've had opportunities to be competitive, we've made either questionable decisions or like nickel and dime. Like I agree. Like the biggest name that I remember that we ever signed or splurged on was Jason Hayward, and that didn't play out as anybody had hoped it would. Great guy from everything I see and read,
Yeah.
but yeah, there's not the spending. And
Well, I mean, could you ask the question of, is that the reason why they're not spending money? Is because the last time they did get the production on the field, but off the field, sure, but on the field, you have some sort of PTSD, if you will, because it didn't pan out the way you thought. Could that be like a reason why?
I mean, it could be, but you have to think about like all those other franchises that take gambles and like it doesn't pay off. Like I think you kind of like our buddy Dave McNeil always says, like shooters got to shoot. So like you got to keep at
Right.
it, and especially for a storied franchise like they have, it would be interesting to see. I don't know what the attendance numbers look like, but if the numbers are down, I could see them not spending. Um, Especially just because it seems like it's more revenue based right now.
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess a counter argument to that would be maybe they will because they're realizing they're losing fans. But yeah, it's been frustrating. I share the same opinions about it.
Yeah, I get that feeling that there's some tension with
Yeah.
our regards. But I do want to ask you, looking forward to the future of the Cubs fan, best case scenario, when as a Cubs fan can we see the Cubs in the playoffs again?
Hmm.
Best
I think
case.
I think the best case would be 2 years from now.
Hmm.
I think that would be with like a meteoric rise like we saw with that team in 2014 and 2015. Now I don't think they have the same pieces that they did. Those guys, Schwarber and Bryant and Russell, all of those had a very high profile behind them. I mean, we have a few, but our farm system is not as touted as it was back then. Now, we also did a lot to acquire those, and I think that the league has gotten much more competitive when it comes to building the farm system and how you draft and use those draft picks. Um, so yeah, I think two years would be aggressive, but maybe if they make the right moves and if people can progress the way they want.
Yeah. You know, another one of the conversations I've only had one other with the Cubs fan as of right now. And he's a partial season ticket holder. It's the first year they allow that. And he watches a lot of the farm system and watches that like almost as much or more than the team. And he's really high on a lot of the guys coming up. I just I'm curious to see. I mean, you get 10 guys coming up out of the minors, maybe 3 or 4, maybe like have decent careers. Um, so his optimistic view is next year. And I'm like, well, I mean, again, Jed Hoyer did say this does remind him of the 2014 year, which means next year would be 2015 when they made the playoffs. So apparently they think it's next year, but I'm kind of on the same boat. Um, Next year would be a great surprise,
Yeah.
but am I expecting it? I mean, not yet. Not yet.
Yeah, and I think the interesting, like even if you had 10 great guys that came up next year, I think part of what we fell trapped to, with that team in the 2010s is you can't have them all come up all at once because then they're going to hit free agency. So like you have to have this blend of some of the veterans that are going to piece it together for you for a couple of years, some of the young guys so that the older guys can drop off. So like there's a cycle to it. Otherwise, you're going to know like you've got this window and then it's going to break up again.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, I'd never thought of it, but that is a very valid point. So I'm gonna have to think about that a little bit more. I do want to ask you a question, not Cubs related. It's just in the news, so
Yeah.
why not? So again, on the podcast, we've had this discussion about which is a bigger deal in this season of 2022. So right now, Aaron Judge has 57 home runs as we record. He could have more by the time it comes out, probably will. He has 57, and Albert Pujols has 697 career home runs. Which one do you think is a bigger deal in the history of the game for someone to hit 700 or possibly someone to break or to go over 61 with no allegations?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think because we're so far beyond like people that have broken the single season record mark. For me, it's hitting that 700 because you know going back to like allegations, Pujols has relatively come out unscathed. I don't know of any major scandals that has linked him to it. So
No.
with that, like if you think about it, and if you're comparing, all right, well, Judge is doing it, without any substances, and Pujols to what we know did 700. I think 700 speaks to me more because there's longevity, and
Yeah.
especially like these last couple of weeks, like he's been on a tear. Um,
Yeah.
and I don't know if it's just like that last hurrah. I would love. I'm not a fan of Alex Rodriguez at all. I would love to see him get beyond Alex Rodriguez his number. I don't know if he's going to. I don't know where he's sitting at right now. Last time I
Oh no, he did. So but
okay
696 is A Rod. So
okay
when this was happening, I even said, I don't care if he hit 700, just pass A Rod, and I'm
yes
okay. Um, so yeah, he has one more than A Rod, so
okay
he's gonna be fourth all time.
yeah. I mean, for me, I think that's the one I would be more interested in because there's been so few of people that have done that. And it's interesting you bring up Judge because I actually had a conversation with a buddy that's a huge Yankees fan and a Yankees fan to a fault. But I was telling him that, regardless of how you feel about steroids or no steroids, the they've really blackballed Barry Bonds. And if you compare, this buddy was trying to compare Judge's season right now to Barry Bonds. And to me, I don't think that year that Barry Bonds like went on a tear, anybody's ever going to touch. I mean, everybody was walking him. He was still hitting all of that. So for me, I haven't been as drawn into the Judge story as I am, Pujols finishing out the career, hitting 700 and wherever he ends.
Yeah, you know, I feel like everyone's had Pujols because we have some connection to his career playing against him so much. Um, but also, the guy is notoriously a good dude,
Yeah.
and I'm like, I'm not. That's not saying Aaron Judge is a bad guy by any means, but having someone with longevity, enjoying it, being back, it's the story. To me, it's the story behind it, and also it's easy to root for a guy that people
Yeah, I'd
like
agree with you.
for a long time. Um, and yeah, so anyway, not Cubs related. So let's get back to the Cubs for a second. Um, actually, two last questions about the Cubs. So is there a player, and again, it could be a Nico Horner, but one of the younger guys, which one do you see as kind of being a cornerstone piece that the Cubs will have to go back to? I know we're not trying to latch onto a player, I
Yeah.
get that, but who do you think is going to be that cornerstone for the next push for the Cubs?
From what I've read, I don't follow the farm systems much, but it seems like this guy is having very similar to the path that, and I'm not going to put him, neck and neck, but with how they're being talked about, at least, would be Pete Crow Armstrong. And if he can actually develop the way everybody's talking about and continue on at the next level with the numbers he's putting up, I would say that he's going to be that next piece. I mean, Nico is a great shortstop, second base, wherever you want to put him. But there's already discussions that we got the better end of that Mets deal. I mean, he was a highly rated prospect with the Mets. So, and maybe he's the person that changes it. I think that's going to be the interesting story to see.
Yeah, I keep getting PCA. Every person I talk to has something positive to say, rightfully so. I don't think the Mets. So the Cubs traded for uh, Pico Armstrong as a part of that Javi Baez deal.
Yeah.
I don't think the Mets really saw him as a power hitter,
No,
and
I
then
don't think
this year he seems like he figured at least something out. So it's someone, and now he's in Double A, and he's doing really well. So again, everyone I've talked to at least projects him to be there. So I gotta believe that.
Yeah.
Um, so this is a hypothetical question. So just go with it for a second. Um, I've asked people this question, and it kind of ranges. Their answer ranges based on kind of a lot, but we again on podcast we've had this conversation a couple times now of if your favorite sports team, let's just say it's the Cubs because that's what we're doing right now, what would the Cubs have to do for you to either temporarily or full time not be a Cubs fan?
Oh,
Yeah, is there something like, is there a kind of a political thing? Is there a moral thing? Is there a kind of a
yeah.
corruption? So is there something that would again temporarily or full blown like walk away from being a fan?
Yeah, it's interesting because I've thought about that a lot too. And when they started to teeter with the whole Cubs network and making you pay for the subscription, that's put a really bad taste in my mouth. And I feel like if they continue down like doing those types of things where you're losing the casual fan, like number one, you're going to lose that fan base that you've had that's nationwide. And part of what I loved about the team. One of the challenges I think that they really face is they seem to be these days very focused on revenue and what they're bringing in. And I know they spent a lot of money on that ballpark, but if you can't make it affordable to like a family or a casual fan, like that's going to be part of the turnoff. Like as an owner, yeah, I get it. You want to make it a business, but the Ricketts particularly sold us all on we're the casual fan. We love them just like you do. That's not lining up with what I'm seeing.
Yeah, the Tom Ricketts. I feel like when his first press conference as the owner, he used the phrase or used the story of like, I used to sit in the bleachers and I still like to sit. And I'm like, how much do the bleachers cost now? It's the same thing. Like, so I know as time goes on, you obviously have to like you pay more money. It's like an Uppbeat, like a quarter. $4 to go. I get that. But yeah, so the affordability, but that would definitely stop you from going to a game. Would that like sort of issue stop you from supporting the team like from home?
Well, I guess it depends. I mean, if they ever go to that model where you have to solely pay to watch their games, I mean that's going to take some of it away. I mean, it's going to make it harder for you to become a fan. Like you're going to have to put effort into watching them, and I think that's where those challenges come into play, and where I would be like, I don't know if I can do this anymore.
Yeah,
because like that it should be convenient to watch your team. It should not. You shouldn't have to figure out I got to pay $10 extra a month for a streaming service. I mean, there's so many streaming services now. We don't need another one.
yeah,
But yeah, I don't know. I think I'd have to be pressed to see, is it enough to make me give up that Cub fan card? I mean, that's a big decision. I think right now it's just a bad taste in my mouth where I'm like, I
yeah,
hope it never come to that.
yeah. I mean, that's a good point. I'm still learning that there are ways that you can stream like the Cubs like marquee network. I'm still learning that there are ways that you can like stream it or ways you can find the app. It's not very accessible
No.
as of right now. Um, Being in California now, I can watch it on MLB TV. So I'm like, I mean, I'm okay. But yeah, if you're close and you're building from around the city, yeah, it's going to be really hard for sure.
Well,
Um,
it's interesting because like we know that baseball has this big push to also diversify. And how are you going to diversify if there's more barriers for somebody young trying to watch the game?
yeah,
I feel like
yeah.
we're going backwards with that.
I mean, yeah. I think it's changing. I mean, you could you could definitely make the argument like that all teams across the league in one way or the other are uh, yeah, I mean, it's about staying in the black, which I get. I mean, your business, you got to stay in the
Mhm.
black. But there is that line as a fan where you're like, I mean, you can be in the black, but bro, you're a billionaire. Can you like spare a little bit for the guy who's not making much? But yeah, I mean, I do think that's an. I haven't heard that yet, but I don't think that's unreasonable to make it like the problems of accessibility to the casual or diehard fan, not just to go to a game, but to see the game. That's not unreasonable.
Yeah.
All right. So the last question is again, I'm not. This will air before the World Series, so you have time. And that actually air like right before the World Series or the playoffs start, so you have a couple weeks. But we're recording a bit ahead, so as of right now, we know the teams that are currently in line to make the playoffs. If you were going to pick your 2022 World Series champion today, who do you feel like has the edge? Who would you
Ooh.
pick?
Oh, that's a tough one. I feel like it's really hard these days to bet against the Dodgers. Um, I I'll be honest. I have not stuck with this season as much. Or they're still in contention. Last time I saw, correct or no?
Dodgers, yeah,
Yeah.
they have the best record in baseball.
Okay, that's kind of what I last time I checked. But things changed so quickly because at part of the season I was watching it like the Yankees were dominant, and I know that then they were on a stretch for they were backsliding, and people don't even
Right.
know anymore. So I would say that you just can't bet against them right now. I mean, they've been there how often the past 3-4 years, and they just seem to always pull something out. Now, whether they get to the championship and win it is another story. But I think if I had to pick one, they seem to be the front runner. It's been
Yeah,
interesting. I think part of me would love to see like a team like the Mets do it, because the Mets have been very similar. Like the Cubs have not been very good. I
Right.
like seeing a story like that, but even they have been struggling lately. Although our Cubs beat them and swept them, so
I mean, that alone it makes me question a lot, but either way, no, I mean, again, being in California, being close to LA, I can't technically say LA. I'm in LA, but I'm as close as you can be. If the I mean, Dodgers fans are everywhere. But yeah, it's really hard to go against the team that's been, yeah, as you said, historically good. I think I saw a stat that said they've won the division. I think it was like 10 of the last 11 or 11 of the last 12 years. In the one World Series. Anyway, so whether you want to consider 2020, I know some people call it a like a not really a championship. I wouldn't go that far. I don't
yeah,
want to get attacked out here. Um, but no, I do think it's hard to go against them. And as you said, like it's a like the Cubs, like kind of again before 2016, always found a way to lose in some ways. And then the Mets, the big phrase that you hear is, "When are the Mets going to Met? Like when are they going to fall apart?" So I would like to see it for them and their fans, but
yeah.
also, I mean, the Guardians now had longest like World Series drought. I don't see them doing it, but got to root for a team that's not won it recently. If anything, Cubs fans got to root for the guys who have gone a long time.
I agree, and that's kind of where I was going with that. Like, I think my gut says like a team like the Dodgers, it's hard to bet against them, but I'd like to see like the Guardians or the Mets win it. Mainly because the Guardians are in the same boat, and we were the ones who won against this World Series, and I mean that was crazy in
Right.
itself. Like
Right.
going from how far behind we were to winning that thing. So
Yeah, I mean, and the Mariners this year are probably going to make the playoffs, and they have the second longest, or no, the longest playoff drought, I believe, since 2001. They have been made playoffs. Yeah, so gotta root for them, but yeah, you gotta go with the Dodgers if you're going for a bet. You gotta
yeah,
go with them. Yeah, so that's all the questions I had. Um, by no means do I need you to ask a question of me. So if it's all good, we can talk for a little bit afterwards.
yeah,
But
absolutely.
did you want to say anything else about baseball? Being Cubs fan, anything that you feel like you should mention?
Um, trying to think what else that we were talking earlier, and there was a thought that came to mind, and now it's left me. I guess I just, in closing, I hope that they have the right pieces in place, whether it be management and players, to kind of move that needle forward again, like we did before. I think it'll be very interesting to see. This will be where we can tell, like, was it Theo that truly made this happen? Was part
Yeah.
of it Hoyer behind it? Who knows? We're going to find out soon enough. I'm hoping that it's the latter, but yeah,
We'll find out.
absolutely.
A- As Cubs fans, we'll find out is pretty much the motto. Um,
Yes.
so,
Oh, that was what I was
but
going to say. Earlier, you had mentioned the question about Judge, and I felt like that was pretty fitting because I know that there's been discussions of, isn't he supposed to be a free agent, and possibly,
yeah,
the Cubs making a splash with that?
uh,
I don't think it'll
I mean,
happen.
if the Cubs have PTSD from spending under $200 million on a player
I
in his
I
in his
agree.
20s, they're not going to go after and pay like $400 million for a guy in his 30s.
Yeah.
Do I want to see it? Of course I want to see it. But, I mean, we're talking about like... He's 30.
I didn't realize he's
just
in his 30s.
30.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, so I think next year he'll be 31.
Yeah.
Which again, I mean, having your best year at 30 is something great, but do I want to see the Cubs do it first? Sure. I mean, there's no doubt. Go out and spend all your money, Tom Ricketts. Like, whatever you got. I don't see it, but
yeah.
I mean, Cubs tickets are expensive, as you said. Imagine them spending that much money. I mean, I don't know. So again, I'm pro, but we'll see.
Yeah.
I mean, that's fitting. We'll see.
Yeah.
But again, this has been a special episode of the Family Based Podcast. My name is Jake, and here we have Fitz. Say bye, Fitz. We're gonna head out.
Bye, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. And we'll have a regular episode coming out in just 2 days on Wednesday. So come back and hear or watch this. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe, all that crap, do that. And we'll see you guys soon. Alright, let me end it.
Hey, I'm Eden. Thanks for watching this episode of my dad's podcast. Check out the links in the description to follow the podcast on TikTok, Instagram, and the other social media. Make sure you like and subscribe and hit the bell to let you know when there's a new episode. Thanks for watching or listening. Bye.